The Honorable Justices of the Supreme Court, hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. All persons having business before the court are admonished to draw nigh and give their attention to the court now sitting.
Please be seated. Good afternoon and welcome to all of you. It's so good to see so many smiling faces in the courtroom today as we celebrate. So we are very honored today to sit in this special session of the Kansas Supreme Court to award our Justice Award to John Peck, the Cannell Teaching Professor Emeritus of Law at the University of Kansas School of Law. We are very honored and excited to be able to honor him today. Before we get into the meat of this ceremony, though, I will also mention that today is Constitution Day, United States Constitution Day. So it's a day we have been celebrating today in various ways throughout our state and our court system. We have had the honor today of participating in a national broadcast that reached over 17,000 students originating from the Johnson County Courthouse and involving us, many of us. I'm seeing some staff members who have been very involved in that and operating and allowed that 17,000 students to participate in a moot trial. It is a day with several reasons to celebrate, but of course today we really want to focus on honoring someone who has brought much to that justice system and much to the education of those who have worked in and provide guidance to Kansans and others about that system. I want to talk to you just briefly about the Justice Award itself and its history. In 1987, the Foundation for the Improvement of Justice, which is a national foundation, presented the Kansas Supreme Court with its Outstanding Achievement Award for significant contributions to the improvement of justice. The award consisted of this gold medallion, which you see here, and which is something that we display here in the Kansas Judicial Branch as really a memorial to all Kansans who have contributed to and supported the Kansas Judicial Branch. In addition, the court received a $10,000 check. Well, $10,000 is a lot of money to the Kansas Supreme Court at times. And it left the question of, well, so what would the court do with that $10,000? And of course, in 1987, this was well before any of us were involved. But the history of that is that the court decided that what they would like to do with that award money was to create what has become known as the Kansas Supreme Court Justice Award. The award recognizes people who have contributed significantly to the improvement of justice in Kansas. Any Kansan, sorry, or any Kansas organization, except the 7 of us, as members of the Supreme Court or our personal staff, may receive the award. But despite that, it is rarely given. Now, I do want to mention, as I talk about the 7 of us, that a third reason for celebration today is that earlier this morning at 9 o'clock, Justice Larkin Walsh raised her hand and took the oath of office as a Kansas Supreme Court Justice. And so she gets to help celebrate today in this memorable celebration, which I think is special to her because she is a KU law graduate and thus benefited from all of the effects of the teaching and the mentoring that occurred there and through Professor Peck. As you will see later in the ceremony, with that $10,000 and the award that is given to, or possibly given to many, we just don't give it very often. You'll see the names on the inside of the program, and you can see that there was an 11-year gap between when we last awarded it and when we've awarded it this year. When we give the award, we do present those who receive the award, a cash award. We also provide them with a plaque, which you see down below, a certificate that the justices have signed, and then their name is put on a plaque that is displayed out here in the hallway in honor of all of those who have received the award over the years. The fact that there was an 11-year gap really tells you, I hope, how special this award is. It is, when we decided this year that we would give the award, we actually decided to give it to two different people. And we had thought we would try to do that on one day, but with scheduling difficulties of working out that with the families and the honorees, we ended up having two award ceremonies. But they did receive official word and official notice at the same time. And so today we are pleased to provide that's the second of those ceremonies on this special day. I do want to take just a minute to introduce some of the special guests. I can't begin to recognize all of the people who are here who we consider to be very special and appreciate having with us. But I will take a moment to recognize Professor Peck, his family that is with him. And hopefully I won't miss anyone as I do this. So we have with his wife, Pamela, his son, Adam, his son, Andy, and his daughter-in-law, Mandy, Bill Peck, his brother, and Matthew, his grandson, and Matthew's guest, Mallory Benson. In addition, Professor Peck included some extended family members that he wanted to have introduced. Jean Cho Dong and Yu On Dean of Overland Park, who are seated with his family. I would like to mention Chief Justice Lawton Nuss, a former student of Professor Peck and a former member of this court who joins us. As I said, there are many others. I could spend an hour probably going through and talking about each of you, but we welcome all of you who are here today. In moving into more of the presentation of the award, it has been the tradition with this award that we allow the honoree to select a speaker, a friend, or a colleague, to actually present the honoree to the court. Professor Peck has asked Professor Burt Griggs to present that award today. Professor Griggs is a professor and director of the Center for Resources Study and Environmental Law at Washburn University. He is a graduate of KU Law School, holds a BA from Stanford, and a PhD from Yale. Like Professor Peck, Professor Griggs has made significant contributions to Kansas law. That includes through litigation of significant interstate water law cases. Professor Griggs.
This is awkward with my back turned to the court. I know this is an appellate court, but I need to build a record. John is not dead. He's very much alive. He's looking at me. So this is not a eulogy. Eulogies can irritate because they put the eulogist ahead of the dead. Think Julius Caesar. Shakespeare wasn't wrong there. So let's get to the facts. John is a native of Concordia, Kansas. Like another great Kansan, Governor Mike Hayden, he grew up near the banks of the Republican River. Governor Hayden caught American eels on the South Fork. John swam in the main stem. That was a long time ago, when the rivers flowed more than they do now, a lot more. He attended Kansas State and then worked in DC at the Environmental Protection Agency and the US Public Health Service from 1968 to 1971. He was present at the creation of federal environmental law. He then attended KU Law, made the KU Law Review, graduated in 1974, and took a job with the firm of Everett, Seton, and Peck in Manhattan. I would like to acknowledge Dick Seton, a friend of all of ours, who has lent his expertise to defending the Quivira National Wildlife Refuge here in Kansas, one of the most important wildlife refuges in the Western Hemisphere. After 4 years of private practice, John joined the KU Law faculty in 1978. KU appointed him to the Cannell Teaching Professorship in 1999, a position he held until his retirement. John's greatest legacy is his work in water law. He has always been deeply engaged. He has produced substantial legislative testimony on water law. He's published multiple recommendations to revise various important parts of our water code. Peck's scholarly work has earned him national and international recognition. He has presented on water law and other legal matters across the United States, Japan, India, Costa Rica, Turkey, Austria, and Canada. He served as an exchange professor at the Vienna University Law School, as well as teaching at Cambridge University. This prominence enabled John to sponsor a month-long seminar on groundwater management. Many in this room participated in that seminar. One of the world's foremost water experts, Dr. Tushar Shah from India, made this statement to John when John was in India. "I've never seen groundwater management work anywhere in the world." With his usual bluntness and candor, John said, "Come to Kansas and defend that statement." It is a credit to John's prominence that Professor Shah took him up on that, and the result was a 3-week seminar on groundwater. More about that later. John was an excellent and dedicated teacher. He was a teaching workhorse. Most law professors who teach as much as John has would be filing complaints with the National Labor Relations Board or possibly the United Nations. But John suffers, as you all know, from a profound defect, one that does not affect most of his colleagues in the legal academy. He is constitutionally incapable of complaining. He missed class twice in 41 years. That's a good semester for most of it. He taught 4 seemingly unrelated courses: contracts to 1Ls, land transactions, family law, and the most glorious field of law ever invented by the human intellect, water law. You may think these are unrelated, but if you think about a typical farm client in Kansas, they're going to, a lawyer is going to have to know at least the rudiments of all 4 of those to think about farm planning. Peck was very generous with his students. He hosted small get-togethers when Pam and John lived in Lawrence. When they moved to Lake Quivira, they started hosting potlucks in the local parks, which John coined the learned hand chicken feed. 4 words which most lawyers are probably not going to ever put together. John has served the local community and the legal community. He has served the Kansas bar extensively, 2 terms on the CLE Commission. He's worked on the KBA Board of Editors since 1985, the member of the Title Standards Committee, delivering numerous CLE programs on water and property law across the state. He also served the community of Lawrence. He was president of the Lawrence Rotary Club in 1990 and 1991, and served as president of the board of the Lawrence Symphony Orchestra. This comprehensive excellence has delivered John numerous awards. He's won 4 major KU awards: the Moreau Award, the Immel Award, and Kemper Fellowship for Teaching Excellence, an Outstanding KU Service Award, and a Distinguished Law School Alumni Award. The award that means most to him is the Clyde O. Martz Teaching Award, which the Rocky Mountain Mineral Law Foundation awarded him in 2018. This is the highest teaching award in the field of natural resources law in the United States. John is not comfortable with attention. He has the modesty that is born of high standards. Everything I have reported so far, Your Honors, is true. John knows it, and so I trust the court will take judicial notice and not allow rebuttal. I would like to spend the rest of my time telling 3 stories about John. The first concerns one of his early cases. A dog smelling steaks on the grill jumped the fence, yanked the steaks, and ran. Miffed but armed, the steak owner shot the dog in the leg. The steaks were not ruined. Indeed, there are men in this audience who would not be put off by bite marks and a little dust. But civil wrongs were committed and the vet bill was $700. Peck filed a petition seeking $20,000 in damages. The other party did not answer within 20 days. Imagine that. And several days later, Peck moved for a default judgment. At this point, the lawyer for the other side called him and said, "Peck, is this how you plan on practicing law in this town? You knew I was going to represent this client. Why didn't you call me?" John got the message, and the matter was resolved in a less dramatic but superior way. John told this story, I think, for a couple reasons. First, he wanted us to know, us law students, that it's unwise to practice law without working and cooperating with lawyers on the other side whenever possible. And this is especially the case in smaller legal communities. But I think he also knew that we were going to make such mistakes anyway, as our zeal and immaturity interfered with our long-term judgment. He knew that his students wouldn't reflect on this story until they made similar mistakes. In my case, he was right. The next story is short. As I was considering law school, I met with John in his office at the law school, and afterwards I made the mistake of telling my wife, a Lawrence native, about the meeting. "John Peck?" she exclaimed. "Oh my goodness, he is so handsome." The duty of candor requires me to report this, but let's move on, please. The final story concerns the aforesaid Asian water experts. We were driving from Spearville to Dodge to Garden on Highway 50, which basically parallels the course of what passes for the Arkansas River. And the experts had been absorbing the alien reality of the Western Kansas landscape, where the average farm is 3 sections and human habitation is sparse. We are not in Bangladesh or India or China anymore. Then the feedlots and the packing plants came into view. They are large. The mood in the van darkened. Our Muslim and Hindu colleagues were processing what was happening in the feedlots and inside the plants. So they asked John what was going on. Intellectually, they knew what was going on, but their questions went deeper. "Yes," John said, "this is where most of the water in western Kansas goes." "Yes," he said, "this water was clean, non-renewable Ogallala water deposited by the retreat of the glaciers 12,000 years ago." "Yes," John explained, "it was legal. From the irrigated corn and beans to the feedlots and packing plants, every entity involved had water rights, and most of them were following the law." But then the questions got harder. Was this the best use of this water? What happens to these water rights when the water runs out? Wasn't water a public resource, as the Kansas statutes said? What will future generations think about the decision to pump the aquifer dry? Should these questions affect our approach to water law? Or in Peck's own inimitable phrasing, is the fox in charge of the chicken house? They were asking John these tough and humbling questions because he had gained their trust and confidence. John has been asking these questions for decades, and I think we owe him and the state some answers. I have more stories, but I'm running out of time. This award recognizes what many of us have long known. John has been the gold standard authority on Kansas water law for 2 generations. The excellence and durability of his work mean more than most realize. Many owners of water rights do not want to know that the law means what it says. And when the courts make that clear, often relying upon John's work, lobbyists, agencies, and the legislature can respond with reactionary legislation. Peck and Peck's work has been a deep keel to these swings in the rudder. Of course, I failed the Shakespeare test. John means a great deal to me. When I was going through the longest 10 years of my life, the 3 years I spent in law school, John saw something in me that not many people did. and he has proven to be one of my most dedicated and effective champions. John loves music, and so I will close by saying of John what Dizzy Gillespie said of Louis Armstrong. Know him, know me. The record backs it up. My time is also up, and so I have the honor and privilege to introduce Professor John C. Peck. Thank you, John.
Pardon me for 1 second. May it please the court,
Yes.
members of the court, fellow lawyers, former students, friends, neighbors, family. First of all, I want to thank Bert Griggs for that very kind, too generous introduction. We go back now about 20 years, and I was first his teacher, then he became my teacher. And we worked on a lot of projects together, and Washburn Law School is extremely fortunate to have him. I want to thank the Chief Justice for introducing my family. She also said I could mention, and by the way, greetings to former Chief Justice Lawton Nasir, my former student. But she said that I could mention the fact that Judge Wolf, Justice Spiegel, and Justice, you've changed your position.
Throwing us off too.
Well, are my former students. I came to Professor Elrod's ceremony about 3 or 4 months ago, and the court was seated in different seats at that time. So, folks, I was extremely surprised to get Justice Lukert's letter telling me that I was a recipient of this award. I'm very grateful, and I'm very humbled. I'm happy to be joining 3 other faculty members who've received this. Paul Wilson was my teacher. Dean Jim Concannon was a KU Law grad and a dean of the Washburn Law School. He was a friend. And Professor Elrod, sitting back here, helped me a lot over the years when I taught family law and I needed help. So that was very kind. The award is for the people who improve justice. And when I think about people who improve justice, I think about people who are on the front lines of battling injustice. And I think injustice is often more readily defined and easier to spot than justice. So I want to mention 3 former students. One is Cheryl Pilot, who works with the Innocence Project in Kansas City, Missouri. That project helps people who've been wrongly incarcerated to free them, and they've been very successful in freeing several people who spent more than 1 or 2 decades in prison. A second person is Al Perkins, who's sitting in the second row. Al is a former student. He now practices law in Jacksonville, Florida. He works for a unique bar association that works to try to correct social injustice and racial injustice on behalf of African Americans. But what I wanted to mention about Al was that he and his family invited Pam, my wife, and me for breakfast in Mobile, Alabama, where Al was from. And Al pointed out, and it was a wonderful honor to eat with your family, Al. Al pointed out that we should stop by the historical monument where the slave auction site was in Mobile from 1805 to the Civil War. Now that's kind of the ultimate type of injustice. And it's these kind of people that I think really deserve this award. The third person was Jana Mackey. Jana was a student. She was a 1L student in my small section class. I remember receiving her short bio, which I asked my students to provide. And she said that she had, the year before, been privileged to work in a rape crisis center. The next year, she was murdered as a 2L. And she was devoting her life to try to combat domestic violence. And I was privileged to be named to a committee that helped set up a lectureship. And now it's a much larger program that tries to educate about domestic violence. Now, folks, I've had an easy life. It's been a fortunate life. First of all, I met my wife, Pamela Canfield, now Pamela Peck, 57 years ago. We've had a long, happy marriage. She's been the bedrock of that marriage, and she knows that I love her and appreciate her very much. I have two sons who are in the audience today, Adam and Andy, my daughter-in-law, my extended family, my grandson. And so I'm very fortunate to have the support of my entire family. I have my brother, Bill. Bill and I were raised in Concordia with two other brothers. We had parents who were in a stable long-term marriage. They believed in education. I had good teachers from kindergarten all the way through the Concordia public schools system, K-State engineering, KU Law School. I had a patient and loving piano teacher. I had hard-nosed athletic coaches who taught us something about discipline and teamwork. I had good part-time employers. Now, Professor Griggs mentioned that I worked for the Environmental Protection Agency, and I was actually in the room when that agency started. I didn't end up working in environmental law, but it was fun to be there. But as I was progressing on my 3-year service application, I was in the Commission Corps of the U.S. Public Health Service, which allowed me to do something other than go to Vietnam. But we were trying to decide what to do after that 3-year commitment. Engineering school, I was getting rusty in my mathematics. I thought urban planning, I was accepted at Georgia Tech and North Carolina. But then I thought, what can a kid from a town of 7,000 contribute to urban planning, maybe town planning? But I was in the office one day and all of a sudden it hit me, law school. I mean, just like sudden brainstorm. I mean, I was shocked. I knew many of my college friends who had gone to law school. I had no training in law. I knew no lawyers. I knew no judges. In fact, several years later, I was reminded of a cartoon that I brought oh, here it is. This is a Doonesbury cartoon by Trudeau. And this depicts Michael Doonesbury and his future wife, JJ. And this would have been in the early 80s. And they're looking at each other. And she says, let's face it, Mike, you're not making it in advertising and I'm not making it in art. We're nowhere. He says, so what are we going to do? What can we do? Law school. Pops into both of their minds at the same time. They both scream, "Aye!" And they hug, and JJ says, hold me. And Mike says, my God, what's happened to us? And I expected Pam to react the same way that night, but in her usual equanimous nature, she said, whatever. And I made her an offer. I said, look, you majored in political science. You're better equipped for law school. Let's both take the LSAT. and whoever does better will go to law school. She knew she'd do better. She said, I don't want to go to law school. And I think that was right. So we chose KU over the University of Colorado. We started in 1971. I think my prospects didn't look very good at that time when I was in my Property 1 class. My fellow classmates who are here, Roger Vole and Steve Foster, know that I took Professor Mike Davis in property. And I wasn't used to the Socratic method. I mean, I was in engineering school where the professor would spend the hour deriving mathematical formulas that we could use. And so as the days went on, the weeks went on, I hadn't been called on. And the trepidation just grew in me. And so we were sitting there, I finally went to Mike Davis's class. And unfortunately, the subject was the rule against perpetuities. Arcane subject that I never could understand, frankly. And so he called on me finally. He said, Mr. Peck, and he asked some question. I was so stunned. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't even open my mouth to say I pass. I don't know. He looks at me and he says, Mr. Peck, if you're alive, will you raise your finger? And so he didn't think much of my prospect. Then I moved to Manhattan and I joined Richard Seaton and Don Everett, two wonderful partners. And after that story that Professor Griggs just told about the shooting of the dog case and my kind of overreaction in getting a default judgment, I think Dick probably wondered whether I'm suited to law practice too. But they let me stick around for 4 years. And it was in the third year when I was there that I received a phone call that was, again, a total surprise. Dean Dickinson called, Dean of the law school. And he said, would you be interested in applying for a faculty position? I was stunned because everyone that they had hired in the previous 10 years were from the elite schools, the Ivy League, the Chicago's, the Texas, Virginia, Berkeley, Stanford. And he said, if you're interested, come down and we'll have an interview, which I did. And somehow I was offered a job. But then in one of those interviews, Dean Dickinson said, well, what would you like to teach? And I said, I'd like to teach land transactions. I practice land contract law titles. I'd like to teach contracts. I love Professor Getz, my contracts teacher. I had been learning how to write contracts. I'd like to teach family law. I'd handle some divorces. He said, how about water law? I said, water law? I don't even know what that is for sure. And that's a fact. Apparently we had offered it at KU. I'd never even considered taking it. I hadn't had a case with Dick Seaton. And he said, well, let me explain. He said the legislature has just come out with an interim committee report that stresses the importance of water resources in the state. We're starting to deplete the aquifers in western Kansas, and they think it's imperative that both Washburn and KU teach water law. Our water law professor, Earl Schertz, had become physically incapable of teaching anymore. Washburn, I think their course is being taught by Dean Raymond Spring. I didn't confirm that, but I think it was. And so I agreed to teach this, literally not knowing anything about it. And so that's what started my career in water. I began to learn about it. I began to teach it. I had good counsel from various state agencies. And then, well, let me put it this way. The law school expects law professors to teach and to do scholarly work, write articles or books, present programs, but it also allows us to do a limited amount of consulting. And so what happened with me was that about a year after I started teaching, I began to get phone calls. I guess the word got out that, well, there's somebody here who's starting to learn about water law. So I would get a phone call and I would say, well, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll try to find out. And so I'd try to get some kind of an answer and I'd give it to him. And then that would lead to maybe presenting that information in class and then later maybe write an article on it. And so that's what really started everything. And so I did that kind of part-time consulting for about 15 years. And then I got another surprise phone call. This was from 3 partners from this Bolson Siefkin firm in Wichita. Mike Stout is here today. He's one of those who was on that phone call, and they asked me to go to dinner. And Stan Andiel, Dick Avey were the other 2. And they said, we'd like you to consider joining us as special counsel. I said, well, I teach at KU. They said, well, can you do that on a part-time basis? And I found out that I could, as long as I limited my time. And so that's been a long, long relationship. At the time, they had recently hired Dave Traster, who's here. Where's Dave? Right here. And so he was in water quality. He had come from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and they wanted 2 of us then to begin to work in water resources. Their argument was, look, we have a lot of big clients and not enough help. You have some work, but you don't have any big clients. And so that's what happened. And that'll be 30 years then next summer that I will have been with that firm. So I'm very indebted to the Bolson Siefkin firm for that relationship. Now, one last point. Again, in one of these surprise communications, I received an email out of the blue in 2002. It was from somebody in Sri Lanka. Now, I have to admit that I had to look that up on a map. I didn't know where Sri Lanka was. And I thought, this is probably one of those things like we get from Nigeria, like send me your bank account number and I'll deposit $10 million. But it was actually from the International Water Management Institute. And Professor Griggs mentioned the man who worked with that institute, Dr. Shaw. And they said, we'd like you to write a book chapter for us on groundwater management. I'd written an article on that. And we'll pay you a small stipend, but the kicker is you have to come to India at our expense. Well, I called Pam immediately. Her interest at the time was comparative religion. I said, Pam, we're going to get a trip to India. And so that was the first of 3 trips to India and then others to the other countries that Bert Griggs mentioned. So folks, it's been a wonderful 41 years of doing that kind of work. Now, let me talk just for a second about water. I mean, I guess maybe that's partly why I'm here. Sometimes I'm asked, as many lawyers are, what do you do? I'm a lawyer. And a law professor. What's that? I'm sorry. What do you teach? I'm a water lawyer and I teach water law. That's when they say, what's that? Just like I kind of did with Dean Dickinson. And so I have to explain that my understanding of water law is that it's divided into 2 big categories, kind of water quality and water allocation. Some professors deal in both areas, some lawyers deal in both areas, some focus on one or the other, and I just happen to focus on the water allocation area. Now, where do the water lawyers fit in the hierarchy of a firm? Well, John Grisham in his book, The Street Lawyer, said, I'm going to give you the hierarchy of a typical Washington, D.C. firm. At the top are the trial lawyers. In his words, the all-time favorite. And next come the corporate lawyers, mergers and acquisitions and securities, and then the antitrust lawyers, then the tax lawyers, then the government relations lawyers, meaning lobbyists, finally real estate lawyers. No one set out to be a real estate lawyer. They kept to themselves reading the fine print in mortgage documents and were treated as slight inferior lawyers by the rest of the firm. Well, water law, to my mind, is a subset of real estate law. So you kind of see where we stand. If we're in the east, but if you go west of the line from Concordia to Wichita, all the way out to California, people will know what water lawyers do, especially Colorado. They have more water lawyers than my hometown of Concordia probably had. So we're the brunt of jokes, lawyers are. And we're also sometimes the brunt of political cartoons. And I wanted to mention one cartoon that I'm actually pictured in. And I'm going to explain this in detail in just a moment, but it shows some ducks in a pond, and they're looking up above, and they see three people with briefcases flying above. And then now I want to tell you what this is all about. And I'll just end that up there. So this concerned a major case out in the Cheyenne Bottoms wetlands area in 1989, 90, 91, and 92. It pitted the State Department of Wildlife and Parks, which had a very senior water right from surface water from the Walnut Creek to help keep the bottoms wet for the migratory bird population. They had acquired this right in 1948, and then over the next few decades, hundreds of irrigation permits were granted, which are junior, and I'm going to explain that in just a minute, to this environmental right for the migratory birds. And in the late 80s, we had some dry periods, so the State Department was not able to satisfy its water right, and they claimed that the irrigators were impairing their right. Now, just a 1-minute tutorial on Kansas water law. I'm not going to put you to sleep, but in 1945, Kansas enacted the Water Appropriation Act. That changed what had been a concept of ownership of water, I should say of land, and people who own land along streams had a right to use that water in the stream. People who own land above groundwater owned the water just like they did the land. In 1945, the legislature came in and said, no more of this. We're going to take control of the water resources. All water is hereby dedicated to the use of the public is the language out of the statute. It recognized water rights that were being used by these property owners before. Water was being used on June the 28th, 1945. They were recognized as vested rights. But from then on, if you wanted to use water in Kansas, you applied for a permit from the Division of Water Resources, and you were given the right then to pump water. In 1957, legislature said this is a real property right, this water right. One of the problems was that in 1945, we didn't foresee, nobody could, what happened in the next 5 years. An invention called the center pivot irrigation system came about, and that began to be developed, and it spread throughout the country. Kansas permitted just a few hundred water rights between 1945 and 1950. Then there were over 5,000 from 50 to 60, over 5,000 from 60 to 70. And now I think I looked, I may not be correct in this, but I think the last number was like 53,000 water application permits that have been filed in Kansas. So back to the Cheyenne Bottoms problem. These irrigators had put in their irrigation systems in what we call the alluvium of the river, which means they're not taking water directly out of the channel. They're taking it from land near the channel and thereby affecting the stream. So the Department of Wildlife and Parks wanted to have their water right protected. So they went to the chief engineer, Mr. Pope, who's here today, and I'm going to recognize him in a minute. And they said, we need to have our water right regulated. And what had happened in the mid-70s was that the state had created the possibility of local control of groundwater. And then in 1976, they created the possibility of focusing on small areas and giving the chief engineer more power to regulate these water rights outside the priority system. So in 1980, I wrote an article about these groundwater management districts, and I suggested, I think there's a potential problem with this because people have water rights based on a priority system, and now we're telling us that the state can regulate those outside the priority system. Isn't that a potential taking of property without compensation, which would be prohibited under the US Constitution? So back to my story. The Cheyenne Bottoms is a very important wetlands area in western Kansas, just north of Great Bend. Mr. Pope called some hearings to decide whether he should declare one of these areas as one of these special groundwater use control areas. I hate to say the word, but it's an IGUCA. And only those of us in the trade know what that means. And so the hearings were held in Great Bend, Kansas, in the Holiday Inn. I was hired by two lawyers, Mark Calcara and Rich Beckman, to act as a consultant to their side. They represented the irrigators. And so we had this great big courtroom I shouldn't say courtroom, the hearings were held in the ballroom of the Holiday Inn. There must have been 12 council tables, cities, special districts, the environmental side, the irrigators, everyone was represented. There were people at the tables, lawyers and their parties, the Kansas Farm Bureau. And it was a extremely interesting and very public, and it was attended by a lot of people in the public. To me, the most striking bit of testimony was given by an ornithologist, world-renowned from Massachusetts, Dr. Gonzalo Castro. He stood up and made this statement: the Cheyenne Bottoms wetlands area is the most important migratory bird stopover point in the Western Hemisphere. Now that makes a big impression. It really does. And that fact, coupled with the fact that the irrigators' rights were all junior to this state right, made it difficult to foresee any other resolution, and the irrigators basically were going to have to cut back. And that's what the final order said. Now, we thought we had some argument maybe for some of the irrigators that this was an unconstitutional taking, but we didn't appeal it past the district court level. So to this day, we haven't had the resolution by the Supreme Court of Kansas about whether this is a taking. And it's been brought up in several other cases since. And so it's an open question. Now, another problem I just mentioned is this mining of the aquifers in western Kansas. In other words, the whole western part of the state, not just one basin. It faces the same questions. Can the state go in there and just shut down those water rights? We see editorials, save the western Kansas aquifers. It's a very tough question, folks. There's a legal question of the property ownership, the economic question. If we shut down irrigators, who's going to pay to pay for the constitutionally taken water rights? That's us, the Kansas taxpayers. And then there's the philosophical question: do we owe a moral duty to save that water for future generations? I think most of us would say, well, yeah, we do. Okay, why? And for how many generations? And what about next generation? Are they going to do the same thing, or are they going to use the water we save for them? So it's a very difficult question. And like Professor Grigg said, these are the kind of questions that I wrestled with for decades with my students, with my fellow water lawyers, and in my articles. Now, I want to just say thank you to some people who have been very important in my career. With two exceptions, I'm going to talk only about the water people, and I'm not going to give a full bio or anything. I'm just going to mention their names and their affiliation. But first, I want to thank Dick Seaton from Manhattan, who hired me in 1974. We've remained good friends for decades. He and I serve on the board of the Kansas Bar Association Journal and have now for several decades. I want to thank the 7 deans of the KU Law School and the faculty. They've let me do what I wanted to do. No one tried to force me to be a certain kind of professor, and Dean Stephen Mazza is here today and some of his colleagues, and I appreciate that. Now, here are the few people I want to name. Mike Ramsey, a former student who's a prominent water lawyer in Garden City. Lee Rolfs is sitting there. Raise your hand, Lee. He was hired by the State Division of Water Resources, Kansas Water Resources Board the same year I was hired. We've become friends. He's read most of my articles in their first draft. And then David Pope, I mentioned. David is a former chief engineer, had a huge impact on Kansas water law. Joe Harkins was the former director of the Kansas Water Office. Connie Crittenden Owen. Connie is sitting there. She's a former student. She was a lawyer for the Division of Water Resources and is currently director of the Kansas Water Office. Mike Armstrong's a former student. He was legal counsel for the Johnson County Water District #1, which provides either the most or the second most amount of public water in the state of Kansas. Ken Titus, Senator Ken Titus is here. He's a former student, was at one time general counsel of the Department of Agriculture and did the work for the Division of Water Resources. And now he's a state senator. David Traster from the law firm of Folston Siefkin. Daniel Buller, who is not here today, but he's a former student. He's our partner too with Folston, as is Wyatt Hope. They are both my former students. And then Rex Buchanan. Where's Rex? Yeah, Rex is was a director of the Kansas Geological Survey. He went on that tour with us. He's become a close friend and very important person in my career. And then last but not least, Professor Griggs. Now, one last thing. In 1988, I saw an announcement on the bulletin board at KU. Come and celebrate the 75th birthday. I thought it would be of a person, of the Internal Revenue Code, 1978, Code of 1913. I thought, just how weird is that? Who would have done this? Well, it was Martin Dickinson, who taught tax, was an expert in tax, and that was his bread and butter. I mean, that's what he taught, that's what he wrote, that's what he consulted in. So as 1995 approached, in 1994, I thought, hey, this will be the 50th birthday, the 50th anniversary of the Kansas Water Appropriation Act. Let's celebrate. Well, I probably took something to my water law class. I don't remember. But in any case, I wrote an article on that act. And in just a moment, I'm going to read you one paragraph. But it dawned on me that I forgot to finish my story about this cartoon. Sorry, this will be out of context now, but so this appeared in the Wichita Beacon in February 1992 after the Cheyenne Bottoms hearing order came out. And down here are 2 ducks that are celebrating with celebratory hats. There's a big sign here with balloons. And then there are these 3 kind of mean looking people flying above with their briefcases. And the sign says the Cheyenne Bottoms Water Rights Victory Party. And one duck is looking up to these 3 people with briefcases saying, whoa, what kind of migratory fowl are they? The worst. Lawyers from the farm interests. Now, that's funny. But I think it's a little unfair because both sides were in that hearing room in the Holiday Inn representing their clients, seeking justice. That's what we do in our due process system. I had told my students about this. They called the cartoonist and said, could we buy that cartoon for our teacher? How much? He says, $100. They said, oh, that's too much. Can't we get a smaller one? I think the original was big. He said, okay, $10. They gave this to me many decades ago, and it's been hanging in my office ever since. Now, back to that article I wrote. This is part of one paragraph. I will not be around to read the essay someone might write at the Act's centennial. That would be 2045. If there is one, but I wonder what the legal, hydrological, and political landscape might be then. A few questions come to mind. Will the Appropriation Act even last that long? Which movement will Kansas have embraced? The public trust doctrine, the strict protection of private property rights, or some reasonable compromise between the two? Will the Western and Central Kansas groundwater aquifers have been depleted? Will Kansans be moving water around the state in large quantities to irrigate even more land or to quench the thirst of large cities? Will Kansas still be litigating with Colorado? Will Kansas be marketing its water to other states or importing needed water from Canada? If written because the act still exists, the centennial issue will no doubt answer these questions and many others. So that was 30 years ago. There's been some progress in this area. In the 30 years, we're developing more sophisticated conservation techniques. We're seeing some voluntary conservation methods in the various groundwater areas of Kansas. Currently, though, Senator Titus and Director of the Kansas Water Office, Connie Crittenden, are working on the Water Program Task Force, which is studying various approaches to solving the state's water problems, and I wish them well. So folks, I hope you can appreciate how fortunate my life has been. Family, friends, opportunities coming from nowhere. I've learned a lot from my students, members of the bar, and for this, I feel like this is a shared award. And so I accept this award, but with my former students and my fellow water lawyers. So thank you very much. I appreciate this.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Peck, for your comments. Certainly on behalf of all Kansans, being a Western Kansan, was a native of Goodland in farm country, USA. I certainly appreciated so much of what you said, but I also feel like I can't just thank you on behalf of all Kansans, but I think I have to thank you on behalf of the Western Hemisphere after hearing your comments. But I would also like to give the opportunity of a couple of my colleagues who had the joy, I think, of being able to experience you at KU Law, who I think have a few comments. Justice Stegall?
Yes, thank you, Chief, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm quite certain, especially after hearing those presentations, that you all share my joy and sense of privilege to be sitting here so that we can all participate in this ceremony that honors you, Professor Peck, and all of your contributions. So we're grateful to be here. But I did want to take just a second to speak quite personally, because when I think personally, It's actually not all the things that we've just heard of that come first to my mind. It is not your stellar decades of scholarship. It's not your impressive contributions to the law. And it's not even your, what is so apparent in your, I don't know what the right word is. I thought aura, that's the wrong word though. Your bearing, let's say, which is your class and your dignity, which does us all proud. We're proud of you as a representative and ambassador of our beloved home state. Those aren't the things that come first to my mind. Instead, what I remember and think of first is a young 1L who was quite naive, pretty scared, very unsophisticated, who walked into one of his first law school classes, which was a contracts class, way back in the mid-1990s. And that student was met with the kindness, the passion, the attention, the curiosity and the knowledge, and most of all, the wisdom of Professor Peck. And that encounter, perhaps really, as I reflect, more than any other, sparked and inspired in me a commitment and also a sense of great excitement to emulate those traits throughout the course of my life, both in and outside of the law. So, speaking on behalf of 4 decades of students who have been mentored by Professor Peck, thank you. Thank you, John.
And also.
And I'm sorry.
I did not mean to
Very
cut you
briefly,
off.
that's okay. I did not have an applause line written into my notes, but I appreciate that. So yes, thank you. I am honored to be numbered among your students. And I'm thrilled to be able to see my friend honored here today by this court. So congratulations, Professor Peck.
Also Justice Wall.
Thank you, Chief Justice. And it's interesting that Justice Stegall and I didn't talk to each other or coordinate our message, but they're very similar. Of course, Professor Peck's accomplishments academically and internationally go without saying, but that's not what stands out to me either. Back in 1999, I started law school, and I was just so fortunate to have Professor Peck as my small section teacher in contracts. And I have to say, for a moment there, when I saw you approach the lectern today and bring out your bag and your notes and a cartoon, I felt like I was back in contracts or land transactions, family law or water law, because it was just, that is your style. And it just brought me back to those days. But what stood out to me too was, I mean, your grasp of the subject matter goes without saying, and it was immediately apparent. But what stood out to me was just how, with all of that intellect and accolades, how humble and genuine and caring you were. You and Pam both opened your home to us and brought us in and made us feel home away from home as we were starting this venture that was really very scary to me too, as a 1L just coming in. And of course, then I will, after that semester, I wanted to take all of your classes, which I think I was able to do. But your support didn't end there. I remember coming in for the next 2 years during your office hours, and other students too, and how genuinely excited you were every time to share an experience or address a question to help educate and bring us along. It never ended all throughout law school. And so it isn't surprising that it didn't end even after we graduated. I know so many attorneys, former students that have continued to call upon you, including myself, for guidance, both professionally and even personally. And you've always been there and expressed just an extreme willingness to do so no matter what. And it's just, truly humbling that when we were talking about, what do we do? You said you're an attorney, but I think about who you are, and it's the person you are that really sets you apart. So in short, I think that your intellectual capability goes without question, but it's just you as a person that meant the most to me, and I think all of your students over those last 4 decades. Brilliant, genuine, and caring. And I really can't think of a better role model for our profession. And I count myself as fortunate to consider you as one of my role models too. So thank you.
May I say something?
You may.
Clark, and I thank you both.
Well, thank you. Thank you once again on behalf of, I'm sure those comments were shared by, I don't know, thousands of students. I don't know how hard to multiply here, but probably thousand plus of students over the years. And certainly many of us who did not have the opportunity to have you as a professor have benefited from your scholarship in our work, or certainly have seen it as it's impacted our state. So we feel very honored to be able to present you with our Justice Award today. Before I step down, I do want to thank Professor Griggs for his comments as well today. But I would like to step down now and present Professor Peck with a couple of small tokens of our what we feel is an honor to be able to present him with this award today. So we wanted him to have something to share with others about that. And then we'll welcome all of you to please join us down on the first floor for a reception where you can personally congratulate Professor Peck and his family and visit with each other. So with that, Professor Peck, I'll meet you. First, here is a small token in this form of our gift to you, along with a plaque that we will present. And I know this is mostly for a photo opportunity. So we'll give one of our photographers an opportunity to show you with the plaque, certainly. And then we have a signed certificate signed by the 7 justices of the Supreme Court recognizing you with this award today. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you again for all of you attending today. With that, court is adjourned, and we'll see you on the first floor.
Rise. Great accomplishments. Very nice.